Did you ever want to change the world?
Oh, yes. I was Bolshevik. I was going to make everything better. Sea of blood followed by paradise.
Where did that come from?
It came from, I think, the collapse of the worldview with which I had been brought up. I was brought up as a patriotic Christian in a country which had more or less ceased to exist, and it became quite apparent to me in my school days and then in my teens and early 20s that it had ceased to exist. The world I'd been brought up to take part in had vanished. And what's more, all the authority that was vested in the people who had begun to tell me what to do was empty. They'd made such a mess out of Suez. They'd had the Profumo scandal. They looked silly. They looked weak. They looked as if they were lost. And the country which they had told me to believe in looked shabby and finished. And so I looked for something else that was more appealing, and I found Trotskyism.
But today you still think the world is sort of finished, don't you?
Well, I think it remains true. I think the country is more finished now than it was then. I think probably it was rescuable then, though rescuing it wasn't really what I intended to do when I was a Trotskyist. It was rather more radical surgery than rescue. But I think the process of total national decline has accelerated greatly since the days when I decided to turn to Marxism and Leninism.
Do you still want to change the world, though? Or
No, I don't. I think apart from anything else, what you'd find as you first of all set out to change the world, as so many people do, is that what you really need to do is change yourself. And I began to notice this when I was reading Arthur Koestler, when I was still a Trotskyist, and particularly one of his minor books called Arrival and Departure, in which he points out that most world reformers have got something wrong with themselves, and that's what they really need to address. And it's a valid point, and I thought it was true, and it was one of the main reasons why I gave up revolutionary socialism.
And so, I mean, you basically criticise for a living now, don't you?
Well, I think I tell the truth for a living. And telling the truth is generally critical in a society which is fundamentally dishonest or more often actually innocently delusional or actively trying to deceive itself.
But what is the purpose of your writing?
Telling the truth is a purpose in itself. It's a good thing in itself. It doesn't need to have any other purpose.
Do you want people to do something as a result?
I used to, but then I realised that they weren't going to, and that was a dead loss. So I thought, well, what is the justification for continuing to do what you do? And that's what it is. It's that telling the truth is
for its own sake.
Is worth it for its own sake. You don't know what effect it might have, and also you become more interested in the long term, or indeed eternal effects of what you do and say, rather than the immediate ones.
When did you decide that you weren't going to have an effect on people?
During the 2010 election, when I had dedicated the previous several years to urging everybody I could get hold of and everybody whose lapels I could seize and whose ears I could bash, that the only way in which the country could conceivably be rescued was if the Conservative Party were thoroughly destroyed, crammed down the plumbing, and we jumped on the soles of its feet until it went down the drain. That was the only thing that was going to save the country, the destruction of the Tory party. And I couldn't get patriotic Conservatives to agree with me on this, and they saved the Conservative Party, which was at that point on the verge of death. And it's now, I'm afraid, saved for the foreseeable future, and it sits there getting in the way of the development of any serious Conservative political organisation. And even if my thesis turns out to be correct again in the future, I'm not going to be around long enough to do anything about it. You don't have a major political party losing that many elections in a row as often as all that. This was an unrivaled and unique opportunity, and we missed it.
Do you still seek the creation of what you would regard as a real Conservative party?
No. I've given this up. I don't. I just laugh now. I laugh at what goes on because it seems to me to be so ludicrous. I regret it. I'm sorry about it. I grieve. There's supposed to be all these stages that you go through when something dies. I've certainly grieved for what used to be my country quite a lot. But now I think I feel free to smile a bit at the idiotic way in which people behave. I mean, the idea that Theresa May was ever fitted to be Prime Minister of a major country always seemed to me to be very, very questionable.
But this was what you were thinking in the run-up to 2010.
Oh, long ago. No, it's long before Theresa May. This isn't. It came in a series of stages, as most discoveries do. I watched the the putsch against Ian Duncan Smith. And I should stress here, I don't have much time for Ian Duncan Smith. He was a terrible leader of the Conservative Party, and he deserved to go. But the interesting thing was the process by which he was removed was very much an alliance between the media, who were immensely powerful in enforcing the limits of politics, and certain parts of the Conservative Party who wanted to get rid of him, and indeed the Labour Party, which had been for years and years and years saying pretty openly that the Conservative Party could only be allowed back into mainstream politics if it adopted more or less the Labour position. And Blair said it. I heard him say it during the 2001 election, the one immediately after the 1997 election. I heard him say it. He actually said that the Tories could never again be elected unless they pretty much adopted Labour policies. And that's what they thought, and that's what that election was about.
Is it then the centre ground, as we call it, of British politics that you hate? This sort of mushy place where lots of people sit.
These meaningless words which people who ought to know better constantly use, like centre and extremist. There is no, you haven't got a centrometer. You can't tell me where the centre of politics is. The centre of politics is simply where those who are currently in office and in power, in politics and in the media, want it.
It's where the majority sit.
Well, it's where the majority may have been persuaded to sit. Majorities, as you well know, are easily manipulated. And the majority is persuaded into believing that this is what it wants and it's the only thing it could possibly have. There are plenty of other possibilities, all of them perfectly sane and many of them superior to what we have.
So you think there was no
they're
natural
completely
place
ignored because of this claim by Blairism, which is what still dominates.
Isn't it way before Blair? I mean, this notion of a centre ground of sort of compromise where most of the British people are quite comfortable.
In this
that
form,
doesn't involve radicalism of the left or the right,
no.
and where most people can say, yes, okay, I can go along with that.
In this form, it is a feature of Blairism. There was Buzzkillism, which I lived through in the 1950s and 1960s, but that was mainly about economic policy. The thing about Blairism is it's much more than economic policy. Blairism is much more about sex and drugs and rock and roll.
All our social values as well.
Well, that's or lack of values, more importantly. But that's what it was about and still is about. It's about transforming the country in a huge cultural revolution, which, when I was a Trotskyist and a student of Antonio Gramsci, I would have yearned for. In fact, I love watching the Conservative Party coming out with policies on the family and marriage and childcare and so forth, which we would have thought pretty radical when I was a trot.
But why do you...
The Tory party doesn't even know where these ideas come from. You can read propaganda manuals put out by the German Democratic Republic, the former East Germany, in which it espouses policies on education and the family, which are almost totally identical to those of the current Conservative and Unionist Party. It is so funny. They have no idea. Keynes said that all politicians were the slaves of some defunct economist without knowing it. I've never seen a political party so completely unconscious of the ideas which it pursues.
Well, I want to come back to all the social conservatism, if you like, in a moment. But just on the economics, if you say sort of the notion of a sort of an economic centre ground has existed for a long time.
Well, that would no. I'm distinguishing Buzzkillism from Blairism because they are different things. They did tend to lead to an interchangeability of the senior figures and the policies of the two major parties on economics, but not, I think, on anything much else.
But broadly, I mean, is it fair to say broadly Britain, likes a market economy in which the poor are not left entirely to fend for themselves, and the rich are not meddled with too much?
But that's
and that's a sort of a mushy place.
But that's
where...
like the man who goes to hear the preacher, and his friends say when he comes back, well, what did he have to say? What was his view on sin? And they say, well, he was against it.
He was against it, exactly.
I mean, it's meaningless. It doesn't mean anything. It's just, I would like to be nice. Well, we'd all like to be nice.
Well, exactly. But that is where economic policy
not necessarily
has
available.
Up,
niceness is sometimes, especially in economics, not terribly available.
Well, you see, a lot of people would say, economic niceness, if we accept that term, has failed huge numbers of people.
You could also say that the supposedly benevolent welfare state fails a lot of people. And we had a terrible report recently about the old and lonely, people who technically they're being looked after, but actually they're slowly dying in the freezing cold, and they turn their lights on when the social workers come and turn them off again when they go, because they can't afford to keep them on. And this after, 50 or 60 years of some of the most advanced welfare state in the history of the world.
But when you started out as a young radical on the left, what did you want? What was the world you saw?
Oh, I wanted a complete revolution in social and economic relations. I wanted the abolition of borders. I wanted the end of the nation state. I wanted the end of religion.
Economically?
I think what I thought was that a state governed by brilliant and benevolent people such as myself could tackle all the major problems of unemployment, hunger, and poverty. That's what people like that believe.
But
I was mistaken.
And did you want to soak the rich and
Rich? I think I probably wanted to shoot the rich.
So why did you conclude that none of this would work?
Well, because it was a
I mean,
very,
you never tried it. Britain never tried it. Nobody ever tried it.
Well, yes, they did, but it was a very easy thing to believe in. And you're terribly young, aren't you? You don't remember the sunny days spread out on the lawns of plate glass universities in the late 60s and early 1970s, when we were completely immune from the world. We were paid to be there. We had maintenance grants. We didn't need to borrow money. Our fees were paid. We lived off the state and lolled around, and we could do what we liked and think what we liked and say what we liked in special little encampments, completely cut off.
But a lot of the things that you
there's a very good description of this in Linda Grant's very clever novel Upstairs at the Party, which describes very much what it was like. She was at the same plate glass university that I was at, York. We were immune from the world, and in those circumstances you could believe what you like. As soon as I began to earn a living, and I earned a living because I went into newspapers. I went into newspapers as a Bolshevik, intending to take over Fleet Street for my cause. But as a Bolshevik, I also knew that you had to be the best at what you did. You had to go through the proper apprenticeships. I was an indentured apprentice on an evening newspaper in a small industrial town, and there I very rapidly learned that the fantasies that I'd been able to entertain on my university campus were unsustainable. They simply didn't fit with reality. It wasn't true.
But you didn't really learn that, did you? You just learned that from your own life experience. You needed to earn money to.
Well, I'd always known that. That was no great surprise. I was dealing with the sort of people I had taught myself to despise, and found that they were not despicable. I didn't stop reading either. I didn't suddenly, because I'd stopped being a Marxist.
But it wasn't about them being despicable, was it? It was about the fairness.
It was about
the unfairness of life.
Bolshevism was about hating the others. It was about scorning them. Yes, very much. And I couldn't do it anymore.
But that's not what drove you.
Why are you telling me this? I'm the one telling you what happened to me. If you know better than I did, let me know. I'm telling you what happened and how I changed my mind.
Well, but I haven't heard really why you changed your mind in terms of what you were dreaming of, because you never lived, your political dream. You never saw a movement that took up your ideas within Britain.
It seemed very clear.
You went to work for a newspaper, earned a bit of money, and just changed your mind.
Well, I didn't say that either. I said I went and lived in real circumstances instead of in this fantasy bubble.
Was there a moment, or was it a process?
Of course, it's not a moment. No, everybody longs for people to have swoons and fainting fits and blinding flashes. No, you think. You resist the conclusions of your thoughts for a long time, and then you find that you've got to do one thing or the other. You've got to admit to yourself that actually what you believe is no longer true, and you have to abandon it, which many people don't do because it's painful, or you have to do that, and I did that.
How were you voting in those days then? Not Labour.
Oh, I didn't vote.
You didn't vote at all?
No, we didn't believe in the parliamentary road to socialism. There were some members of the International Socialists, which was the sect to which I belonged, who thought that maybe we should. There was a slogan we once came up with: "Vote Labour without illusions." But I think most of us probably didn't bother. I think I did vote Labour in 1970 because I was 18 and I'd got the vote at 18, and I thought it might be fun to use it, but it was with no great sense of anything other than I ought to see what it was like to go into a polling booth.
Because a lot of young people now think similarly to how you thought.
Yes, they do.
Those days. It's just like, from a different perspective and from a different experience. And I just wonder whether you can say to them, you're wrong because we've tried it and it fails, or for any particular reason.
I'm not particularly interested in telling them they're wrong. It's something that they wouldn't listen to me if I did, and it's something they will have to discover for themselves. They are wrong, but the other advantage I have over most people is I can understand why they so very strongly think they're right. I find it completely understandable. I can sympathise with it, and I think that anybody who ignores it is foolish. And it's one of the reasons why very rarely, I think, among conservative commentators in Britain, I have from the start thought that Jeremy Corbyn was to be taken seriously. I still do.
You were similarly atheist in those days.
Oh, very much so, yes. You have to be. If you believe in creating a new type of human being, you can't believe that man is made in the image of God. And if you believe that there is a God, then you, in the Christian sense, then you believe that man is made in the image of God. The two things are mutually exclusive. And also, the other thing is that they're obviously rivals. The idea of an earthly utopia is an absolute negation of the idea that this is a vale of tears and that it's in eternity that you find justice and truth and happiness. They don't. They contradict each other. There are no doubt Christian socialists, but they're not Bolsheviks. I think you would have to struggle very, very hard to find an example of a Christian who was also a Marxist-Leninist.
And did you ditch that at the same time, or did that happen on a different time?
I wasn't
path?
particularly concerned. You fight a war on one or maybe two fronts. I wasn't particularly concerned with that aspect of it. The whole aspect of religious belief came up a lot later.
And why?
Oh, as I always say, for reasons which are both extremely boring, crowned with cliché, and totally private.
Well, okay,
it doesn't take. It doesn't.
I don't want to pry.
Well, then don't.
But
it doesn't. It doesn't take much. I've given you my answer. Really, it doesn't take much to work out what I mean by that. But I'm not. They're completely. If you were able to waterboard me into saying what they were, you'd be bored stiff.
No.
I
mean, I don't seek to do that at all. But
not allowed to.
But I'm interested because you now speak openly about, your values being, rooted to some degree in belief and Christianity and all of those sorts of things.
Yes, but I don't talk about my personal life.
And so I'm just wondering, what was it? Was there a journey? Was it a moment, or was it just part of
as I said before,
ditching
there are no moments. Any thoughtful person changes his mind over time, slowly, and against his own strong resistance. Do they? Well, I haven't met one. I don't know anybody who has. Mind you, I haven't met.
Particularly
I haven't
religion.
I haven't met many people who changed their minds.
Given you have changed your minds on these two really big things, do you not now have self-doubt?
Of course.
I mean, most people get older and they start thinking, maybe I don't feel quite so strongly about that. Maybe I see the other side. You, in your writing, certainly seem to only get more fiery and more trenchant. I mean,
well, you say that. I mean, you introduced me as someone who was brought on television to be angry. I'm not. I'm not particularly angry.
You're not?
I don't think so. What would I be angry about? What would be the point? It doesn't get your point across. What I do find is that having been brought up before the Cultural Revolution and believing in certain means of expression and speaking as far as possible in complete sentences and using English to its full power, I get accused of being pompous and indeed of being rude and dismissive simply for doing what comes naturally to me. That's just something that happens. If I adopted the demotic speech in an estuary accent and didn't finish my sentences, people would still hate me, but they wouldn't say that about me.
What I mean is, how do you know you're right now?
I don't know. I believe that I'm right.
I believe
that I'm right.
Yeah.
I don't know. And knowledge is not given.
Is it perfectly feasible in your mind that you could change your mind again?
Of course it is, yes. I mean, if you have changed your mind, then you know that this is something which, when it comes to it, it's much more like, say, discovering. Because it's not that unwelcome, but it's much more like discovering that you've got some sort of disease which you have no control of, which has taken over your body, than it is like taking a decision. Oh, today we're going to go out and we're going to do Marxism and Leninism, and tomorrow I might try a bit of Anglicanism. It comes to you in a way which you can only resist by lying to yourself.
Lots of people are really interested in you and your brother, obviously, and have been for years and years and years.
They are.
And it's been written about, and you've debated in public, or you had debated in public. What can you now say, looking back, on your relationship and how it formed you? Because you were both these incredibly outspoken, controversial, political men from what sounded like a sort of a fairly traditional conservative English family. How did this happen?
I don't know. I mean, you have to ask a more specific question than that. Your guess is as good as mine.
Was it your parents? I mean, did you sit around the dining table debating politics
Well,
at
actually,
8 years old?
thinking about it, I mean, I don't think any of us were stupid, but I don't think either of my parents had any particular interest in, or had any great chance to develop an interest in thinking for its own sake. They were. My father had been a naval officer. He had to be conscious of the world around him, and had developed pretty pessimistic views about it as a result of what he'd seen and experienced. And who could blame him? My mother, I don't think, had any again, particularly developed political views, but had had some pretty raw experiences in her childhood and afterwards, which might have influenced her. But we didn't discuss politics much as a family. I think, and I think this is something I simply don't know. It's guess. I remember Christopher coming home from school one Christmas, which I think would have been 1964 when he was 15, and he was transformed. I think he'd fallen under the influence of a charismatic teacher, as some people do, who had greatly. He was not the same person as he'd been before. And
how old were you then?
I was about 2.5 years younger, but I remember he was very anxious to be off after that.
So did you copy him?
To some extent, younger brothers always do copy older brothers. It would beyond doubt, especially if home is pretty uninspiring. Yeah, I think that would be fair. Yeah.
So he lit something in you then?
Oh, very much so. His influence on me is undoubted. I'm really glad to have had him in my life for that reason. But the point, as one grows apart from one's parents and becomes an individual, something similar happens if you have a powerfully influential elder brother. You grow apart from him as well.
And how do you look back on him now? I mean, you wrote a very touching piece after his death in the Mail.
I'm glad you thought so.
Have you changed at all the way you feel?
I have to cope with a lot of silly people who write to me on Twitter and say things like, "Oh, the wrong brother died" and stuff like that. It doesn't. Oh, good heavens, yes, and worse things than that. It doesn't. People think when I say that I'm upset about it. I've been insulted by experts in my life, and these people are not experts. It doesn't bother me in any profound way, but I feel I do need to work out a response to it rather than just to ignore it or let it ride. I feel by ignoring it, I encourage it. So I will hit back at it a bit. So, no, you'd have to ask me specific questions about the relationship, which I'm very happy to answer if you want to. People seldom ask me the questions which if I were me interviewing myself, I would ask myself. But feel free to ask if you're interested.
Did you like him?
Not a lot. No, we fought a great deal. We wouldn't, as I have said this, if we hadn't been brothers, we wouldn't have known each other. We were very unlike as people.
Even as children?
Oh, as children we fought like anything, yes.
And yet you must have hero worshipped
very
a little.
violently. Yes, of course, a bit.
I mean, what's interesting is, how does younger brother hero worship turn into "I don't really like you" when you both ended up doing a similar thing?
It's quite easy. It's quite easy to dislike your heroes. I mean, no man is a hero to his valet, and very few people are heroes to their families.
Did he
know
do
too
something
much about them
to disappoint you, or to upset you, or to reject you?
Reject, disappoint. No. No, we didn't. We were confined in a not particularly large house for school holidays. Because we went to boarding schools, we were thrown into each other's company, and we would fight, sometimes physically.
Do you think you were cleverer than him, or he was cleverer than you?
I think we're both pretty clever. I don't know whether you could have a measure as to which.
You never thought that? Isn't that the most natural rivalry?
No. No, I don't think so. Obviously, it would be ridiculous to pretend that he wasn't clever, but I would say it'd be equally ridiculous to pretend that I wasn't either.
You just thought he was wrong about lots of things.
Well, I think that he was wrong. I think that he continued to be a utopian long after he should have stopped, and that's what got him into his mess over the Iraq War, which is the big mistake that he made. That he supported that.
Do you think he was naive?
No, I think he had the problem which all ex-Bolsheviks have, and he wasn't that ex, because he still admired Trotsky, for instance, till the day he died. He continued to be a utopian and to believe that the world could be started again, and he began to identify the United States as the revolutionary force. And I think he really believed the stuff about bringing freedom to the Arab world. And it's a utopian opinion. He was also very, very great enthusiast for the European Union. Similar thing. Read the operative bits of the Communist Manifesto, the original 1848 job. There's an awful lot of idealism about open borders and the end of nations. And that is what runs through the minds of all serious Marxists, the utopia. And he saw the United States in its post-2001 state as the best engine towards utopia, and he supported it. So I think he actually did end up on one occasion going to George W. Bush's White House. It's the first time he polished his shoes for years, as far as I can recall.
Do you miss him at all?
Of course.
You loved him, even though you didn't like him.
You absolutely. You have to love, and I did. And of course I miss him. There's nobody else now with whom I share those years.
So as a columnist then, some people will say, critics of yours will say, well, Peter Hitchens, he's a controversialist. He just wants to say...
Well, they will say that, won't they?
What goes against the grain.
But that's because they want to dismiss what I say, and they'd rather not listen to it. So they say he's just doing it for fact.
But do you see why they would say that? Because he's changed his mind, and as he's changed his mind, he's always gone against whatever.
It's the sort of thing you say about people you don't want to listen to. When I was in the course of changing my mind, it would have been one of the things that I would have said about the people who I would otherwise have found persuasive. If you want to dismiss somebody's argument, then go for the person. Say, oh, he's just showing off.
When you're writing a column...
But it's not true.
It's not true.
No.
When you're writing a column, when you're tackling a particularly sticky subject... Do you ever think this is going to get people going? Or, do you have to do that as a columnist?
No, I don't think so. I've found that whenever I've striven for effect in anything I've ever done, it's failed. So I don't. If I strive for effect, it doesn't happen. It doesn't. It will not come. Will not come about.
So it happens accidentally.
So this sounds, when you first say it, as if it's an arrogant claim of personal superiority. It's not intended to be, nor is it in my view. I think I have a gift. It comes to me, and I use it. But if ever I try and seek effect on my own, simply by saying this might, then it doesn't work. I obviously have tried on occasion, but it never works.
As you did in 2010. You mean in that way?
There I just had an argument which seemed to me to I didn't just make the case over and over again for year after year. I had long correspondences with my readers. I telephoned them. I had email exchanges with them. I met them on some occasions. I argued with people incessantly about this. I even went to other conservative columnists and pleaded with them to support me in this. I said, I only need one other voice to say this, and it will become important. But as long as it's just me, it won't. But that was because I genuinely thought that I had the key to changing British politics, and I couldn't turn it, and it was infuriating. But that wasn't the kind of thing that we were talking about, which is that you write something in a particular way that you think will attract attention because of the way you're saying it. It was because I believed, a very powerful and necessary argument for the good of the country that I had to make.
It brings us back to this whole question of sort of social values that you often write about, and that you alluded to before. I'm trying to work out what it is that you object to about the way, popular politics now, both on the left and right, have sort of coalesced around an area that is essentially tolerant of other people.
Tolerance is your description of it. Tolerance is actually a much tougher thing. Tolerance involves accepting, as I most definitely do, that other people around me will live lives differently from me and in a way which I don't necessarily approve of or like, and I will not interfere with that, and that they will hold opinions that I don't like, and I will not try to stop them from expressing them. That's what tolerance is. But this isn't tolerance what we have now, because apart from anything else, it shows no tolerance to people like me. It is absolutely...
Legally it does.
Well, legally it does, but But that's just the phase that we're going in at the moment. I went a few months ago to address a meeting at a college in Oxford, and I was the object of a demonstration, and not just a demonstration, all kinds of leaflets have been written about me. I looked at them and I thought, in a slightly different society, not all that much further down the road of intolerance from the one that we're in, this could pretty much be the indictment at my show trial. The things that were said about me were partly true, skillfully twisted to make out that I had held different opinions from the ones that I do, and that I'd said things which I wouldn't say and wouldn't think. The people who made these indictments undoubtedly believed them, and would, I think, given the power, have been happy to quite possibly, certainly silence me, and in a not too distant future, probably imprison me for what I think. They would have felt that their own opinions were so superior to mine morally, and that mine was so wicked, that they would have been justified and right in doing so. And that was a strong sense they got. And this in one of our best universities, where people are supposed to be taught to think, which they're not, of course. They're taught how to think, but they're not taught how to think. They're taught what to think. And they've been taught what to think, it did feel. I won't use. I'll try and use mild words. It was perplexing and concerning to experience this, and I thought, this is a shadow of the future. I know exactly how. Anyone who's studied history knows that free societies can very quickly descend into something else.
Where do you think it's going?
Oh, I think it's going. It's apart from anything else. It's going towards a noticeable narrowing of the opinions which can be expressed. If it's done by really intelligent people, it's not going to lead to prison camps or executions or the guillotine. It's going to lead something much more like Brave New World, where things are simply not known and views are simply not expressed. And of course, the fact that to express a view to any large number of people, you need access to mainstream broadcasting, means that simply by not being on, or not being on very much, you can be marginalised.
But that's not true anymore, is it?
Well, I think it is, yes. I think it still makes a huge impact, where the mainstream broadcasters still have an enormous amount of power.
But don't these these movements undoubtedly exist, and they are intimidating, but don't they exist on all sides of the spectrum?
Well, I don't know. I certainly would never do it, and would never urge anybody to do it. And if I saw anybody over whom I had any influence doing it, I'd tell them to stop it. So, but I don't belong to any movement, so I couldn't say.
So it's the shutting down that worries you, rather than the sort of the organisation of the alt-right, particularly in America and all of that.
Lots of repellent people. I don't know, and people. I'm amazed that people sometimes expect me to be a sympathiser of Donald Trump. How can you possibly, if you've read a word that I've written or listened to what I've said, think that's so? I don't like these people either.
Lots of people will say, yeah, no, I can completely see that. But what I struggle with is your apparent hostility towards things like gay marriage and multiculturalism.
I'm indifferent to gay marriage. I've specifically written that it's a waste of time to get involved with the subject. It's a non-issue for me.
It doesn't bother you, though.
Well, it's not something which I find. Well, put it like this: it doesn't seem to me to be a huge social advance. But I'm not. What it also seems
is it a bad?
What it also seems to me to be is a wind up.
But is it a bad?
Huge elephant trap. It's a very minor bad thing which flourishes as a result of a much more important bad thing that's happened.
We see. I mean, even that is a view that a lot of people just kind of go, well, why is it a bad thing at all? Why can't you just live and let live? If you're
I do live and let live. I
libertarian,
don't go round interrupting same-sex marriage ceremonies, or shouting at people who get married, or saying rude things about them. I do live and let live. It isn't a big issue, and I regret enormously ever having involved myself in any discussion of the subject at all. I wish I'd never bothered. It was a waste of time. The huge moral issue confronting all Western societies since the middle 60s has been whether lifelong marriage itself can survive. and
between
anybody,
anybody, yes.
yeah. It's just that and all these other things are consequences of that and diversions from it.
But if you say things, about race and politics, where you say, well, it doesn't really make any difference whether politicians are black, white, or brown.
Well, it doesn't to me.
Well, it doesn't to you, but to a lot of people it does. So why tip at it?
Well, I think because I think it's a very important point. When I was engaged in campaigns against racial discrimination and racialism, as we called it, in the 1960s, and when I went on demonstrations,
when did racialism become racism? I don't know.
Well, because it was easier to shout and easier to paint on walls, and easier. It sometimes spelt racism as if it were fascism. And also it means a different thing. Racialism is racial discrimination. Racism contains much more of it. You can be called a racist, as I have been, without in any way believing in racial discrimination, because it's a cultural thing.
Yeah.
Much more than it is. What we then said in the 1960s was there was one race, and it was the human race, which I still very much adhere to, and that the thing which we should aim at was complete integration. And what we see now is wholly different from that. And I still believe in the things that I used to demonstrate for in the 1960s on that matter. And I think they were right. And I think integration and a complete colorblindness was much more desirable than what we have now. And I was fascinated by many elements of the Macpherson report into the Stephen Lawrence murder. And one of the things that was most fascinating was its rejection of what it called colorblind policing. I thought, that's wrong. Policing should be colorblind. That's exactly what it should be.
But it comes to this whole question of tolerance, because as I understand it, what you really think is that, black, white, or brown is fine, but what we need is an integrated culture.
I certainly do.
And that's obviously, massively in opposition to what a lot of people think. That we should allow different cultures to thrive alongside each other, and as long as we're not killing each other and blowing each other up, then that should all be fine. And again, it's this question of tolerance and intolerance that I just wonder whether actually, when you say you want this sort of harmony and you're not racist, is it actually a bit of an intolerant position?
I'm not saying it. These are facts. I do want harmony, and I do not believe in racial discrimination.
But you think harmony is only really achievable?
Opposed to racial. Well, I think harmony is better
through an integrated culture, don't you?
Harmony is probably only achievable beyond the grave. But I think that if you're going to create a more harmonious society, I think then you should aim for integration rather than multiculturalism. Yes, very much so. If you go for multiculturalism, you create, and this can be seen in parts of this country which doubtless you visited as well, you get two solitudes with their backs turned upon each other.
Yeah, but I don't think that has to be
once
the
that's
way.
happened, it seems to me to be a necessary consequence of encouraging multiculturalism and failing to encourage integration. And
I grew up in the Northwest, and it was
happened.
one of those towns where people were very, there were segregated communities, and it's still very much that way where I grew up around Nelson and Burnley, and where there have been riots.
Yeah, Burnley, I know.
But it's not like that everywhere in those places, and there are there are communities that live quite happily alongside each other, and there are peoples who don't despise each other and don't fight each other. And I just wonder whether sort of the natural belief, or the instinctive belief that people must mix, is itself intolerant.
Well, I just think that what you described would have worked out better by now if we had had much more of an active policy of integration. I think there would be. You say there are, and I'm glad to hear it. There are places where people don't have their backs turned on each other. Well, that's good, but I think there would be fewer people with backs turned on each other if we'd pursued for the past 50 years a policy of integration rather than the policy of multiculturalism.
But what do you think that policy of integration means for people who are having to drop their own cultural and religious beliefs?
They don't have to drop their
Isn't it a subjugation of...
No. You must remember that people who come to this country from elsewhere are volunteers. They've come here, and they come here generally because...
But everybody came to this country. I mean, this is a country of immigrants, isn't it? I mean...
It isn't a country.
We've established that pretty...
It's not a country of immigrants. It was a country almost entirely bereft of immigrants.
Well, there were no indigenous Britons, were there? I mean...
Well, you can... I think between about 1066 and the arrival
Okay,
and the arrival
if that's where you're
and the
starting.
arrival. Well, I tend to think 1066 is a pretty good starting point. It's a long time ago.
Even since 1066,
and you will find
we've had waves and waves of immigration.
We have not had waves and waves of immigration. We have very, very small quantities of immigration with the Huguenots and with the Eastern European Jews. And apart from that, pretty much nothing.
In the last,
and then there was absolutely
in the last 150
enormous, absolutely enormous levels of immigration, completely out of scale with anything that previously happened.
Well, it's still the case that we've had waves of immigration over the years, and Britain has absorbed it, and it's all, been part of what makes up Britain. So the question is...
Well, I don't quite sure what point you're making.
Well,
I mean, do you think I disagree with that?
No, but what I'm asking you is, if you believe that integration is really the only way to a sort of a harmonious society,
the only way. I repeatedly say I think it's better. I think there may be some other even better way that no one's talked about.
But
if you said integration again, I mean, of course there are people who believe in segregation and chucking people out.
But
well, we're not them.
What I was trying to ask you,
we're having an argument here about which is the more civilized of two civilized propositions. I think integration would be more civilized than multiculturalism.
But I'm asking you what you think the effect is on that immigrant community, and you're saying effectively, well, they don't have to come here if they don't want to.
I didn't say that. No, you're putting that into my mouth. I didn't say anything of the kind. I said that people come here by choice, and if I'd been able to finish my proposition, I would say they come here for the very good reason that this is a society of enormous freedom and tolerance and flexibility and free, and I've visited an awful lot of countries, free of bigotry on a scale.
Precisely. Free of
bigotry on a scale almost unexampled, as far as I know, in anywhere in the world which has major religious or racial minorities. So people come here for that reason. When I was a Trotskyist, we were in favour of immigration, not because we liked migrants. We couldn't have cared less about migrants.
But because you hated Britain.
Exactly.
But just because you thought that doesn't mean that was a mainstream view.
It was mainstream among revolutionaries.
Yeah, exactly. Mainstream among.
Well, okay, and you say that, I was in a Trotskyist sect in the late 1960s and early 1970s. So were probably more than a quarter of Blair's cabinet.
But
but the difference between me and them, including Blair, and the difference between me and them is that I'm completely open about it, and I would say this is something that I no longer adhere to, and I've completely broken with it. And if you ask anybody who was in New Labour politics in the 1990s about their Trotskyist past, they clam up like anything because it still matters to them.
So are you saying the Trotskyists won, and that's why Britain's the way it is?
I'm saying, well, Trotskyism as such, as the narrow sectarianism of students in their early 20s, didn't win.
But that generation,
the cultural mindset of people who grew up with that spread out of the universities in the 70s and 80s into the legal profession and into the media and into politics and into education particularly, and it's now pretty much predominant. It's not doctrine, and very few of us, I was among the few who probably would actually bother to read Lenin and Trotsky and go through the Marxist-Leninist text and imagine for a while I even understood dialectical materialism. That's what I was like. But most of them had a much vaguer grasp of it. But the revolutionary intent certainly continued, yes.
But why don't you think they just wanted to make Britain better?
Well, I don't doubt that's what they did want. But I believe they were mistaken in thinking that's what they were going to achieve, and I think that looking around me, I tend to feel they didn't do very well.
You feel, as you wanted to, that they wanted to destroy Britain.
Well, they had the belief. They had the belief which revolutionaries have, which is that you have to destroy to create.
It's not a very generous way to think about these people, though, is it? Why can't they have just...
Why should I be generous about them? They've helped to wreck my country. Why should I be generous about them? I don't go up and punch them in the face in the street or anything. I just don't approve of what they did.
And if they think they made Britain
is that
better...
all right? Well, then I think they're mistaken. They have a similar, if not more, uncomplimentary view of me, so that's okay.
Do you think yours is a mainstream view or a minority view?
It's certainly not a mainstream view. Yeah.
And does that ever make you doubt whether you might be right?
Not in the slightest. No, I think the thing which would make me doubt that I was right would be if I suddenly became a cult and had millions of supporters. That would make me worry. That would be frightening.
Do you intend to carry on forever?
Well, no, it always comes to an end, doesn't it?
I mean, writing. I mean, do you imagine yourself writing until you die?
I would like to, but it may not be given to me. I mean, you have no idea how it goes. I've been lucky to get as far as I have done. You've no idea how soon decrepitude and
Well, you've migrated onto the internet very successfully, haven't you? You have a
it's kind of
blog,
you
you
to say
tweet.
so. Yeah, but it doesn't make you immortal, though, does it?
But what I mean is, you don't need the kindness of a publisher anymore, do you? I mean,
Oh, I believe very much that there is no, certainly for someone who does what I do, there is no platform remotely equivalent to that given by a national newspaper. I think national newspapers are uniquely powerful for someone who writes and whose fundamental means of expression is writing.
so as long as you've got a newspaper column, you'll be happy. Are you happy?
Happy?
Are you a happy
I'm
person?
happy sometimes.
Because you seem very angry a lot of the time.
Well, you say that. Have I been angry during our discussion?
No, I mean,
You know, I know people say about you. There's a terrible ability to mistake political discontent from personal happiness. I could be simultaneously politically contented and personally miserable, and the other way round. The two are not the same thing. Also, I tend to think that my personal life is no business of anybody else's, and I don't talk about it. So you can judge for yourself whether I'm happy or whatever it is. Happiness seems to me to be an evanescent thing anyway. It comes and it goes. There are moments in your life when no doubt you've been happy and moments when you haven't been. But no one could say of that era that you were happy as a matter of fact during the entire period.
but you'd understand why people might think somebody who criticises a lot professionally may not be that happy a person.
Well, I could understand why they might think it, but I think they'd be pretty foolish to think it, because it's not a rational conclusion to draw. Say, political discontent has very little to do with personal contentment. I'm a very fortunate person, but I recognise that a lot of other people are not, who live around me now, and I fear very much for those who will come after me. In fact, my principal fear is for those who come after me, because I think that we've chosen the wrong future and it's piling up around us. But I shall probably be...
We will make America great again.